Hey, welcome everybody to another episode of the Becoming Human podcast. Today's episode is going to be about a divine connection to nature. So, where I got the topic from was sometimes I facilitate these meaningful conversation groups with a really good friend of mine, my spiritual brother. He's a Baha'i. He's of the Baha'i faith, and I'm not a Baha'i, but I really enjoy getting together, having these conversations, and facilitating with a larger group because one of the things they do is they welcome large groups of people together from diverse backgrounds and spiritual practices or what have you. And we talk about some of the challenges that humanity faces, and we talk about how to come up with solutions moving forward. And with that said, before I move forward, if you haven't picked up a copy of my book, Becoming Human, a Rite of Passage, go ahead and do so. I've been getting lots of great feedback and had the chance to do some presentations in regards to the book, do some live one-on-one with people, and a really great time. So if you haven't had a chance to get your copy of the book, go ahead and get you one. I will put a link to the book in this description. And basically, the book is me talking about how I learn to see my challenges as a rite of passage and not as setbacks, but as stepping stones for growth. So there's a lot of wisdom in there from different places that I've traveled and different indigenous folks that I've had the chance to meet with. And I kind of was inspired by those stories and created my own version of them, as well as personal stories that has enlightened me and inspired growth within me over the years. So I've gotten tons of great feedback that I didn't expect, and so I'm excited for more people to read it and share their feedback. So please leave a review as well. I'm really curious to see how the book touches you, right? So thank you very much, and let's hop into today's episode: a divine connection with nature. Now, the reason I wanted to do this episode outside of facilitating the group is because sometimes in a group setting, the conversation can kind of take on a life of its own, and it's a fine line between making sure keeping us on track, but also letting the conversation have its own life and its own breath, and let people have some moments of what's the word I'm looking for? Some epiphanies, right? It's really cool hearing people explore, and then you see they answer their own question. Sometimes when those moments are happening, as a facilitator, it's good to kind of take a step back and let the conversation evolve. So there were some perspectives that, or some angles that I didn't really get to address fully, and I want to do so in this episode, in this conversation. And I want to share it with you. So, thank you all for listening and always being there. And let's hop into it: a divine connection with nature. Now, one of the ways I like to view nature is I view it in the aspect of love, because I view nature as an expression of love, right? One of the many expressions of love. Creation itself is an expression of love from my perspective. And love is a frequency, that we tap into and we feel. And if you look at a spectrum equalizer, spectrum EQ, I'll say love is that medium that every frequency has to oscillate through in order to exist. And so the challenge is for the individual is, how do you make yourself aware of the presence of love, right? Not is there love, but how do you make yourself aware of the presence of love? And that's the challenge that we all face as individuals. And I like to explore that in regards to a divine connection to nature. Now, when we look at love, it's not discriminating. Nature is not discriminating, right? Between, I once heard someone say that love it woke up a rat today, the same as it woke up you. I like to say love woke up your enemy today, just the same as it woke up you. So it's not discriminating between the concepts of good and bad the way we like to look at it, right? It's giving everything the opportunity to express itself. But love does have a failsafe, and that failsafe is physical death, right? Now, if you can't just go around killing everything, right? The at a certain point, the environment won't support you. You can't just go around eating everything, right? At a certain point, your inner environment won't support you. It'll start to evict you, right? And you'll die. So that failsafe love has for nature is physical death. Now, the difference between someone experiencing love or not, in my opinion, is how well you work on your mind enough and how well you work on your body enough to perceive and experience love, right? If your mind is always fixated on what's going wrong, what's bad, what's negative, what's stressful, what's painful, what we like to call some of those lower vibrations, those lower frequencies, if your mind is always fixated in the body that way, then it's very hard to be aware of love and feel its presence all the time. But the same is true for vice versa. All right. Now, so how do we open ourselves up to experience love? Well, when you read the definition of compassion, for example, it says compassion is oftentimes called love in action. But in order to have compassion, there's you need awareness, right? A deep sense of awareness, empathy, right? And then the expression of compassion. One of the key expressions of compassion, I should say, not the expression, but one of the key expressions of compassion is mercy. And mercy isn't always necessary, but because we live in a world where we do have hierarchies and power dynamics, it's important to always have mercy present, right? And use it when necessary, especially when there's a power dynamic, because you have the ability to affect a person's day, right? So you always want to show mercy, right? Especially, where due. So you could say that awareness plus compassion enhances your capacity for mercy, which opens you up to experience more love. So awareness plus compassion enhances your capacity for mercy, which opens you up to experience more love. Right? Now, let's see. So it's important to say too, though, but in order to have empathy, you need to have a realization. This is super important, and I don't want to skim over this part. And for those of us who always, I hear empathy get used a lot. It gets thrown around a lot in circles, kind of like in meaningful conversations. Maybe not that one in particular, but just in general, where you just need empathy. I hear people say that a lot when they're frustrated and yes, that's true. But it's important to understand that in order to have empathy, you need to have a realization, which means that, in other words, an experience needs to feel real to you, right? You don't need to have had the experience yourself, but it needs to feel real to you. And this is how we know love doesn't discriminate. Because if you haven't had a realization, if the experience doesn't feel real to you, then oftentimes it requires more energy for a person to express compassion than it does for them to be indifferent or avoid the the scenario altogether. Right? So that's very important to realize that it's causing them more pain, right? Because they haven't had a realization. If a person haven't had a realization, it might be causing them more pain to show compassion than it may be to be indifferent. And that right there, that in and of itself requires mercy from you if you are the person who is proclaiming to have a deeper sense of awareness or deeper understanding. I hope that makes sense. So, what does this have to do with the divine connection to nature? Well, is the body not nature? Right? And isn't all of these sensations happening in the body? Right? So the challenge is, the reason why we struggle to understand nature is largely in part because we haven't devoted enough time to understand the way our bodies communicate with us on a personal level, right? And this is this is challenging for most people. We've been at kind of the mercy, right? We've really been at the mercy of love. We've been at the mercy of existence because many of us have based our identities off of who we've been told or taught that we are, which is okay because you do adopt societal identities, but many of us haven't been given the space to explore who we may discover ourselves to be, if we've been given enough space to do so. In fact, most people I come across who have a deeper sense of awareness of who they actually are. This comes about through some type of trauma where there was this forced separation from the identity they adopted and reality, right? And so one of the ways that nature shows us mercy, right? And we can see that divine connection to it is still here, right? Despite all that we've done unknowingly to a large extent, it's still here. It continues to grow, right? It continues to show us mercy. Even if we go beyond a breaking point on this planet and it no longer supports us, right? It still does that out of mercy for the whole, to make sure we don't mess it up for all of creation. And the same goes for all other species too. Now, during this conversation, meaningful conversation with the Bahá'í, that the Bahá'ís put together, we read from some of their text, and there were some key parts in their text that really stood out to me, and I wanted to touch on them, or at least a couple of them, because when I hear us explore solutions, vast majority of the times the solutions rarely ever involve the individual themselves changing. More times than none, is always fixated on the person who we may deem to be impossible, who isn't going to change. And in our mind, it's easy to think that if we could just change that person, right? Or if we can get this thing over here outside of us to change, then we'll be okay. And we don't really have to do much change. But it's actually the reverse, right? And if you think about it, or if you take the time to think about it, we all know this, but every possession that you have, every possession that you own to your name right now, or ever will own on this planet, comes from the earth, right? So it's already given. And so what needs to change is how we give back. I hope that makes sense. Now, one of the key parts, here, let me open this up. is that really stuck out to me is I'm gonna jump around here. So it says science, information, and knowledge alone, however vital, will be insufficient to address the concerns of the globe. Um, and then it talks about the capacity to build a shared sense of vision and purpose and pursue it through acts of collective volition, to sacrifice for the well-being of the whole, to trust and to give freely and generously to others will be critical to the work ahead. These will not arise through political expediency or mere environmental pragmatism. Rather, they will need to draw on the deepest source of human inspiration and motivation. All right, so that part was so powerful to me because it's telling us that the answer will not lie in all of the systems that we've created. The systems that we created are like pretty cool. They afford us a lot of luxuries and conveniences, but they do come at a cost, right? We've convinced ourselves that if we can change the systems, we don't have to change. And I see this when you take like a government course or something like that. I can remember being in government class, how we have all these layers of government that are designed to fix a flaw in this part of government, to address a flaw in this part of government, to address a flaw in this part of government. And what you end up with is this web of band-aids that are designed to fix the other's mistake. And what happens is these checks and balances end up turning into another way to disrupt as opposed to actually fixing the problem. So removing all of those band-aids and actually getting to the wound itself and start to clean and address the wound itself is what's necessary. And that's what that part of that passage was saying, that the systems that we create alone won't be sufficient enough. It's going to require our deepest inspiration and motivation. It requires you to value yourself in a different way, not monetarily, but a different type of value, self-value, that you may not have ever experienced. Now, that is a tricky one for a lot of people. When I ask people, what is self-love? How do you value yourself? Some people get it, but most people, for the most part, can't really see beyond expressing what they know to be love through some form of, what's the word I'm looking for? Materialist way, right? It's the way they express love is through commodities, and I understand that, and but that's just a small part. It was one time I had a chance to practice with some monks. And, for several days we were doing some deep diving, some exploration, and really learning some things about ourselves. And the main teacher, we were having a similar conversation, and we ended up on the topic of love, self-love. And we got to the question, well, how do you practice self-love? What does that look like? And, none of us really had a good answer, right? We had some guesses, and that's part of the challenge. And this is why it's important to not only have conversation, but to seek understanding. Seek understanding more than you desire to talk. And the teacher, the main teacher, shared with us that the way you practice self-love is to follow your inspiration and don't procrastinate. Right? That's a different type of conversation you have with your with your subconscious, when you, one, follow your inspirations, right? Because you tell yourself that you trust yourself in the moment. You trust your intuition, right? That conversation that's happening with you and the divine, with the divine through you, with nature, and not procrastinating. Right? A lot of times we put things off. Of course I've done it before too, but ever since I heard that, I've always made an issue to not do that. In fact, I have journals where if I'm not in a position to get to it right away, I write it down and I make sure I revisit it and get to it within the time frame that I've given myself. So I'm not procrastinating. So I'm following through on all of my inspirations. And I can tell you, it changes the internal dialogue you have with yourself. You feel more free. Now, something that requires persistence, but you feel more free inside and you feel like more things are possible than they aren't. Now, why is this so important with nature? Yeah, you are a part of nature, but when you value yourself on a deeper level beyond commodities, all of a sudden you begin to value the subtle things around you more, right? Yeah, we all may value our new car or our house, but you begin to value the subtle things around you more, right? When there's an insect in your house, instead of killing it, you might put it in a cup and take it outside. And that's just one example. But you begin to value the subtle things around you more. And this is important because nature communicates with us in subtle ways. And in order to understand that language, you need to value yourself and your relationship with yourself a lot more. When you value yourself, you begin to understand how your subconscious communicates with you, right? How your body communicates with you. And you learn how to communicate back with yourself in effective ways, ways that lead to meaningful and lasting changes. And that extends to the environment around you, right? And you don't have to give as much effort to changing other people. You begin to, you stop being pulled by other people, and the presence that you have begin to pull more people in your direction. And now they have more of a willingness and a more openness to explore what you might be doing, to see if it's something that they feel is possible for them. And in most cases, um, even if they don't think they can, because they see you doing it, they're willing to give it a shot. That's beautiful. I mean, what more can you ask for, right? And you know, I want to give a special thanks to my friends at the Bahá'í community for always inviting me to facilitate and speak. I really appreciate it. Anytime someone values your perspective and are willing to explore it with an open heart and a humble posture, as they say, it's really a treat. So I want to give them a special thanks, and I'm giving them a shout out because I'm, touching base on some of their material that we discussed from the Meaningful Conversation meetup. So I want to give them a special thanks, and I want to thank all of you for tuning in. I really appreciate that as well. I look forward to hearing some of your comments. And again, if you haven't gotten a copy of my book, Becoming Human, a Rite of Passage, go ahead and get you one. It's really cool. I enjoy writing it. I enjoyed writing it. You never know, what's going to happen. I really didn't have too much of an expectation. I wrote the book just to say that I wrote the book. It was one of my inspirations. But it's really cool to see that the book gets such great feedback from people who I know and respect, as well as some people who I don't know, and it still had a positive impact on them. So I look forward to hearing you all's insights and and seeing some of your reviews. And may you be happy, may you be healthy, may you be well.